So a few days ago, I found myself thinking about music, not the business of music, not music theory, just music itself. Because if you break down music into parts, it's kind of ridiculous. At its most basic level, music is just vibrations moving through the air. That's it. A guitar string vibrates, a speaker cone moves back and forth, pressure waves travel through oxygen molecules and eventually reach your ears. Your brain then receives those signals, processes them, and somehow turns them into an experience. And yet, that explanation to me feels completely inadequate. Because a song can make you cry. A song can transport you back 20 years. A song can remind you of someone you've lost. A song can make thousands of strangers sing together as if they've known each other forever. I've listened to songs that felt like they understood me better than people did. I've heard a lyric at exactly the right moment and felt something shift inside me. And the strange thing is, not every song does that. There are technically brilliant songs that leave me cold. There are simple songs built on three chords that just stay with me forever. You can understand music theory. You can understand chord progressions. You can understand rhythm, harmony, and melody. And somehow, that still doesn't fully explain why one song becomes part of your life while another disappears the moment it's over. It's like there's something else happening, something that emerges when all the parts come together. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this isn't just true of music. It might be true of being human. What's up, y'all? Roy here, and you are listening to the Clemenz with a Z podcast. So there's actually a word for this idea. Scientists and philosophers call it emergence. And while the concept can get pretty technical, the basic idea is surprisingly simple. Sometimes when you put things together, you don't just get more of the same thing, you get something entirely new. Take water. Hydrogen isn't wet, oxygen isn't wet. Put them together in the right way, and suddenly you have wetness. That property doesn't exist in either element by itself. It emerges from their relationship. The same thing happens all over the natural world. Individual ants aren't particularly impressive, yet somehow thousands of ants working together can build colonies, find food, adapt to changes, and behave almost like a single living organism. Or let's consider the human brain. Scientists estimate that the brain contains around 86 billion neurons. Yes, 86 billion. Each neuron is sending and receiving signals, tiny electrical and chemical interactions happening constantly. And somehow, from all of that activity emerges consciousness, awareness, memory, imagination, the ability to love, to grieve, to sit in your car listening to a song and wonder what any of this means. That's wild. And what's fascinating is that even the people studying these things don't fully understand how some of it happens. They can describe the parts, they can describe many of the processes. The whole often remains more mysterious than the pieces. And honestly, that's what grabbed me about emergence. Not because it proves anything, not because it proves God, not because it proves spirituality, just because it reminds me that reality is stranger than I usually give it credit for. That maybe there are things in this world that can't be understood simply by taking them apart. Maybe some things can only be understood by seeing how the pieces belong together. Music feels like one of those things. Love feels like one of those things. A family feels like one of those things. Honestly, maybe even life feels like one of those things. And as I keep thinking about all of this, I realize I was running into a question I've spent most of my life asking. Why? But maybe there are two different kinds of why. Because I've spent a lot of my life asking why. Maybe y'all have too. Why did this happen? Why do people do what they do? Why am I here? Why does any of this matter? As I've thought about all of this emergent stuff, I've started wondering if there are actually two very different kinds of why. The first kind of why is the one we're probably most familiar with, okay? It's the why that asks, how does this work? What caused this? What's happening behind the scenes? Why does music affect the brain? Why do memories attach themselves to certain songs? Or why do humans fall in love? It's the kind of why that science is incredibly good at exploring. And I love that. I genuinely love learning how things work. I love reading about space, atoms, evolution, consciousness, psychology, and all the strange things we continue to discover about ourselves and the universe. Every time we learn something new, though, it feels like another curtain keeps getting pulled back. But then there's another kind of why, different why, a deeper why. It's not how does music affect us, but why does music matter to us? Not what happens in the brain when we love someone, but maybe why does love feel so meaningful? Also, not how did consciousness emerge, but what do we do with the fact that we're conscious at all? And what I'm starting to realize is that these two kinds of why aren't competitors. They're asking different questions. One is seeking explanation, the other seeks meaning. One asks how, the other asks what it means. And maybe part of my struggle over the years has been expecting one type of why to answer the other, expecting explanation to eliminate mystery, expecting knowledge to somehow satisfy wonder. The more I've lived, the more I realize that some explanations don't make things less mysterious. They make them more mysterious. Learning how stars are formed doesn't make the night sky less beautiful. Learning how music works doesn't make a song less moving. Learning how consciousness might emerge from billions of neurons doesn't make being conscious any less strange, right? If anything, it makes it stranger because now I know a little bit more about how it happens, and I'm still left sitting here wondering, why does any of this feel so meaningful? And that's where things get interesting for me because I grew up in a world that really liked answers. Because I, like maybe most of y'all, grew up in a religious world that placed a high value on certainty. There was an answer for everything, a right interpretation, doctrine, belief, way to understand God, scripture, salvation, purpose, suffering, relationships, and truth. Now, to be fair, I understand why. People want stability. They want confidence. I do. I l They want something solid to stand on, and there's nothing wrong with that. But somewhere along the way, I think I absorbed the idea that mystery was a problem to solve rather than a reality to encounter. If there was a question, there must be an answer. If there was uncertainty, someone needed to clear it up. If there was a mystery, eventually we'd figure it out. And if we didn't, well, that felt uncomfortable, sometimes even dangerous. And looking back, I think I spent a lot of my life trying to arrive somewhere, trying to reach a place where everything finally made sense, a place where all the questions were answered, a place where faith was certainty, a place where doubt disappeared, and a place where I knew exactly what God was doing and why. But life has a funny way of interrupting those plans. People die, relationships end, dreams fall apart. You discover things about yourself that don't fit in the boxes you've been given. You encounter people whose stories challenge what you've always believed. And suddenly the world becomes more complicated than the answers that you inherited. At least it did for me. There were seasons in my life where that felt terrifying. Because if certainty is the goal, complexity feels like failure. Questions and doubt feel like failure. Not knowing feels like failure. But over time, something in me began to shift. I started meeting people who were comfortable saying, I don't know. Not because they were uninformed, not because they didn't care, because they learned that reality is often bigger than our explanations. And strangely enough, that didn't make them weaker. To me, it made them humbler, made them more curious, more compassionate. Because once you stop needing to have every answer, You can start paying attention. You can listen. You can learn. You can wonder. And maybe that's one of the reasons this idea of emergence resonates with me so much. Because emergence feels like a reminder that not everything important can be understood by taking it apart. Sometimes the whole remains mysterious, even when you understand the pieces. And honestly, that's where most of my spirituality lives these days. Not in having the answers, but in learning how to sit with the mystery. And even as I say that, I can feel a little tension in myself because part of me still wants to define it, to nail it down, to explain exactly what I mean. What is this thing that I'm talking about? Is it God? Is it source? Transcendence? Consciousness? Is it just a human tendency to look for meaning in things? Honestly, I don't know. And what's interesting is that 20 years ago, that answer would have bothered me, maybe even scared me, because I was taught to think that faith meant certainty, that if I believed something, I should be able to explain it, to defend it, to systematize it, to build a case for it. But these days, I find myself less interested in defending mystery and just more interested in paying attention to it. Let's go back to music. Like I said before, you can learn about sound waves and music theory and what happens in the brain when you hear a song. And I genuinely love learning those things. I do. I love knowing that these vibrations are traveling through oxygen and vibrating our eardrums and our brain is like working it out. That's amazing. But none of those explanations diminish the experience for me. Honestly, it deepens it. The more I learn, the stranger it becomes. The more I understand, the more I find myself just standing in awe. And maybe that's what I'm trying to get at. When I listen to a song that seems to reach into some part of me I didn't even know was there, when I look up at the night sky and try to comprehend the scale of the universe, when I hold my son and feel a love that is somehow both ordinary and impossible to describe, I don't necessarily find answers. I find wonder. And for me, wonder has become one of those places where spirituality happens. Not certainty, wonder. Not explanations, wonder. Not conclusions, wonder. Maybe what I used to call faith was often just certainty. And maybe what I call faith now has more to do with trust. Trust that the reality is deeper than we can fully grasp. Trust that mystery is not the enemy. Trust that not every question exists to be solved. Because here's the thing, I don't need emergence to prove God. I don't need music to prove God. I don't need consciousness to prove God. I don't need anything to prove it. I'm not interested in those arguments or winning anything like that. What interests me is the possibility that the sacred is not found at the end of the explanation. Maybe it's found in the depths of the experience itself. And maybe God, if I even want to use a word, that word in this moment is not the answer that closes the mystery. Maybe God is the depth that keeps opening it, the depth that keeps inviting us further in. And that feels, honestly, both exciting and a little uncomfortable because it means I don't get to stand on certainty anymore. I don't get to point at a tiny explanation and say, there it is. Instead, I find myself participating in something I don't fully understand, which, now that I think about it, might be true of most of the important things in life: love, parenthood, friendship, grief, music, meaning. None of them fit neatly inside a definition, yet somehow they're among the most real things that we experience. Maybe that's why emergence keeps pulling me back, because once you start noticing it, you begin seeing it everywhere, not just in science or music, but in ordinary life, in relationships, and in communities, in things that shape us. Let's take a family. A family is not simply a collection of individuals living in the same house. It's something more. There's a culture, a language, a history, shared jokes, shared wounds, shared memories, something that emerges that cannot be reduced to any one person. The same thing happens in friendships. You've probably had the experience where you get together with a particular group of people and a version of yourself appears that doesn't show up anywhere else. It's not a fake version, it's a real version, a version that only emerges in that particular combination of people. The whole becomes something different than the individuals. I think about camp when I think about this. If you listen to this podcast for any length of time, you've heard me talk about camp. The activities mattered, the games mattered, the cabins mattered. But those things by themselves don't explain why camp meant so much to me. If they did, every camp would be life changing. Every game would be transformative. Every week in the woods would leave a mark. That's not how it works. Something emerged there, a culture, a feeling, and a sense of belonging, and a collection of relationships that became something greater than any individual relationship could have been on its own. And I think honestly, that's part of why I struggle when people try to reduce everything to information. Because information matters, ideas matter, and truth matters. But a life is not just information. You can know all the facts about love and still never experience it. You can know all the facts about grief and still be unprepared when it arrives. You can know all the facts about music and still never be moved by a song. There are some realities that only reveal themselves through participation. And maybe that's true of spirituality too. Maybe faith isn't simply believing the right things, it's participating in something larger than yourself. Maybe meaning and community work that way. Maybe healing works that way. Maybe even being human works that way. Because when I look back at the most important moments of my life, very few of them involved acquiring information. Most of them involved connection, conversations, relationships, moments of beauty, song, a loss, a birth, a realization, an experience that somehow became more than the ingredients that created it. And maybe that's one of the reasons I'm so drawn to this idea, because it reminds me that reality is not just made up of objects. It's made up of relationships, connections, and the things that happen between things. And sometimes what happens between things turns out to be the most important part. Which brings me back to where this whole thing started. A song, a few vibrations moving through the air. It's all music is, at least from one perspective. Strings vibrating, air moving, sound waves reaching our ears, neurons firing, chemicals releasing, and yet somehow that explanation never feels like enough, does it? Because a song can become a memory, a song can be comfort, a song can become grief, and a song can become hope. A song can become a companion for a season of your life. And maybe that's what I've been circling around this entire episode. Not whether we can explain things, because we sure can explain a lot, right? And I hope we can continue to explain more. I love learning and science, discovering how things work. I don't think that knowledge is the enemy of wonder or the enemy of anything. I think knowledge often deepens wonder. But I've also come to believe that understanding how something works and understanding what it means are not always the same thing. Remember, there are two types of why. One asks for explanation, the other asks for meaning. And I think they both matter. I think we need both. And I think that the healthiest spirituality isn't one that rejects knowledge. It isn't one that demands certainty either. I think it's the one that just stays curious enough to keep learning and humble enough to remain amazed. Because the truth is, I don't know what consciousness is. I don't know why music affects us the way it does. I don't know why love feels so powerful. I don't know why some experiences seem larger than the parts that created them. I don't know why reality keeps producing beauty or why any of us are here. But strangely enough, that bothers me a lot less than it used to. Because these days, I think faith might have to have something to do with trust. Trusting that mystery is not something to conquer, that uncertainty is not the same thing as ignorance, and trusting that reality can be deeper than my explanations without becoming less real. And maybe that's why I find myself drawn to this idea of emergence. Not because it proves anything, I don't think it does. Not because it settles any debates, but because it reminds me that some of the most important things in life seem to happen when the parts come together, when notes become music, when people become community, when experiences become wisdom, when love becomes a family, and when life becomes a story, and things that are somehow more than the ingredients that made them. That's where I'll leave it. Not with an answer, not with a conclusion, just a question. What if some of the most important truths in life aren't found by taking everything apart? What if they're found by paying attention to what emerges when those things come together? And maybe, just maybe, that's where wonder begins. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Clemenz with a Z. If something in this conversation resonated with you, stirred up something in your heart, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at clemenswithaz@gmail.com or just send me a DM over on Instagram at Clemenz with a Z podcast page. If you're looking to support the show, the best way and easiest way you can do it is by subscribing, rating, and leaving reviews wherever you listen to the podcasts. You can share it with a friend, post on your socials, drop in a group chat. It all helps more than you know. If you want to support the podcast financially, head over to clemenswithaz.com. There's a merch store there with all sorts of things like shirts, stickers, mugs, bags, all that stuff. You can donate directly also through the GoFundMe with the link in the show notes. Every bit goes a long way into helping me keep these conversations going. And if you're looking for something else, maybe you're a reader rather than a listener, check out my Substack, Devotions for the Disillusioned and Deconstructing. That's where I share short reflections, devotionals, and some extra behind the scenes thoughts that don't always make it to the podcast. You know, this podcast keeps going because of listeners like y'all showing up, engaging, and passing it on. So thanks for being here, thanks for listening, and thanks for being a part of this messy middle with me. So until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Peace.